discussion. We were discussing the challenges associated with climate change. And in fact, it's a call to some degree for new research. Now, a few colleagues earlier this year wrote this manuscript, including myself, on the climate disaster and the impact on medicinal plants. It's a review where we are looking at the distinct challenges we face and the various outcomes so far. You know, things like habitat fragmentation, which is coming here, but also unsustainable use, problems in accessing plant materials in a community where 10, 15, 20, 100 years ago, people had easy access. The plants are now gone because of climatic changes. The reason why I'm highlighting it is in fact because what we don't have at this stage are proper methods to study this. Climate change is a long-term process. We are very good in comparing things analytically, what we just discussed earlier. Harvest 1 and harvest 2, one in August, one in September. But how do we study a process which goes on over 50 years, 100 years or more? And that's really what this paper is all about. And I thought it's also quite interesting to see what Planta Medica has done with this article in terms of making this little video, which, as I said, is mostly summarizing the abstract in a quite a nice way, but it is a way to really highlight the specific challenges we as a community are facing. So it's adding a little thing. If you are interested, as I said, if you look for Wendy Appelquist, like Appelquist there, you'll see the in Planta Medica, you get right to the paper. And interestingly, Planta Medica was very happy to make it gold standard open access, so it's BBC-Y, the full open access, so you can just download it without any subscription. So that's as a little add-on, and as I said, as part of our discussion here, what I think is interesting to think about how we as scientists can actually develop a methodology. What can we do to understand the impact of climate change on the quality of our medicines, on access to it, on the quantity that can be harvested? And one important point here is, yes, what do we learn from other disciplines in terms of thinking about methodologies? So there was just a little thing in between. I think we can stop you. Okay, that's another one of these videos, but we don't need them. So, okay. The main thing, there was a little introduction to the second part of this discussion. So again, this is the chance today to ask any questions and make any more comments about the last 4 days. We have a different session this afternoon and we can continue there. But what other points for discussion, other questions would you like to ask and which have not been discussed? In part, obviously, to the whole question of chemical variability and quality control, but also well beyond this, other areas which interest you. What is the question you always wanted to ask and didn't dare to do in the last 4 days? Now is your chance. Nothing so far? What did you not understand? Where was I too confused? You can't tell me that everything is clear on what I say. I don't believe you. Okay, then I'll continue with what we just did. I'll ask in sort of a random way, do you see personally as the greatest challenge in this whole area of ethnopharmacology? What is going to preoccupy us in terms of methodologies, concepts, challenges within India and the like in the next 5 to 10 years? You want to start? You're always very proactive. What is the big challenge? Yes? Yes?
Concerned challenge is climatic influence, and one more thing, policy decision in India is now to industrialize. As a result, recently I gone through a newspaper of our own state in Tamil, states that 11% of Eastern Ghats is demolished for mineral resources. Since it's a chain, it's a continuous Ghats, whereas Eastern Ghats spread over starting from Orissa to Tamil Nadu in a discontinuous chain with valleys. So people are not, the policy makers are not actively concerned with conservation. I think so.
So you see major issues with conservation.
Conservation, yes. And one more thing, recently dengue virus was prevalent, causing disease dengue in South India. And in 2013-14 academic year, when I was a postgraduate teacher, the government of Tamil Nadu advised every school to give a decoction of Andrographis paniculata mixed polyherbal formulation. In vernacular language, it is called as Nilavembu Kudine. From that only I got an idea to study the Siddha polyherbal formulations. Though government every year supply the powder in the powder form to give an aqueous extract decoction to each student, but there is no idea for the authorities or any NGOs or institutions to conserve those plants, because what I think so, after a decade some plants may become extinct if we go on continuous exploitation of that. So this is what I know a little bit about my state. And
so now if we talk about Siddha versus, let's say, Ayurveda, how is your assessment of the situation of Siddha medicine in India versus Ayurveda? Are they really equal as the acronym Ayush implies, or is it more difficult to understand Siddha scientifically and to implement it than Ayurveda? So where is the situation in terms of looking at these various Indian traditions?
Actually, I have had gone through a paper comparing Siddha and Ayurveda formulations, and unfortunately I forgot to bring that paper. But I again browsed Google Scholar and I forgot the author name. But anyway, once I reach my state, I will send a screenshot of that. But after reading that paper, that author states that both Siddha and Ayurveda are twin sisters. They have a more uniqueness of compatibility. That is, the formulation may slightly differ, but the target to combat a disease is similar with both of them. They have little bit of differences concerned with preparation. Say for example, in Ayurveda, for hydrophobic, that is lipophilic compounds, they use cow ghee much as ghritam. Concerned with South India, they use sesame oil. Of course, we too use cow ghee, but sesame oil is much prescribed. But the plant extract, the plant formulations which are prescribed is almost common for both Ayurveda and Siddha. And one more thing, last year in 2018, I submitted a review article at NCRT as a teacher educator, what I said is we must. There is a myth in South India that Ayurveda and Siddha are quite different. No, because it is clearly mentioned in Siddha literature that sage Agastya initiated the Siddha study along with his 17 disciples, including himself. We call them as 18 Siddhas. The same sage wrote a Sanskrit script called as Agastya Samhita, and also, up to my preliminary understanding, he is mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So all these sages were wandering along as a monk across the nation, though we have princely states separately in those days. So there is much more commonality between Siddha and Ayurveda, and concerned with preparation and usage, there are little bit differences. This is what with the preliminary knowledge.
Thank you, very interesting. Other comments on what are the big challenges you face? Yeah.
Sir, I don't know. I'm a newcomer to this term, ethnopharmacology.
That's good. Newcomers always have the best insights, just that they're spoiled by all the old ideas.
But what I feel the biggest challenge the world is facing in the agricultural world is the use of pesticides. I want to know whether all your drugs, formulations and ethnopharmacology, do I have ever involved the use of pesticides or being intermediated by these uses, because all the formulation you come across, is there any effect of all those pesticides on all these medicinal plants?
I think it's a very good question. Now, I don't know too much about studies in India, but it is a common concern that pesticides cross-contaminate fields, corn cultivation, the non-organic versus the organic cultivation. Pesticides levels in some herbal medicines are exceedingly high. Sometimes you see this in a pharmacological assay. You suddenly find a tremendous activity of a plant extract, which is due to some pesticide, which also acts as an antimicrobial, to give you a simple example. So I think more important is obviously the use and the lack of implementation of proper control of pesticides, which I wouldn't say you can deny a role for pesticides globally. That wouldn't be naive. But the irrational use, especially of glyphosate, is a huge problem. And it's again a topic where we have not made it mainstream. And again, it's not a topic where we've thought about better practice regarding the sourcing of the material. The big pharmaceutical suppliers, they're all very good in mitigating against it, including some food companies. I'm in touch with a very large and fast expanding British company, and they are looking at their source material with the greatest attention to detail. They have contract producers in India mostly, but also now globally. And they inspect the farms on a regular basis. They look at pesticides. It's not only pesticides, it's herbicides, it's also heavy metals. So there's a whole range of other compounds which are of concern. So it's certainly something well worth exploring and looking at in much more detail. The study design is, as always, an interesting challenge. Yeah, what other great challenges do we have? Somewhere in the back, you don't have any challenges? I'm sure you have.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
No more challenges? We all have solved the problems of the world? I don't believe it.
Yes, I think this sustainable supply of the raw material, that is the main challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And before that you asked the difference between the Ayurveda and the Siddha system. And this Ayurveda system, it is mainly popular in the northern India, and Siddha system, it is mainly popular in the South India. And it basically Ayurveda is the mainly describes the three dosas. Three dosas are there: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And it describes the Vata is in the old age, Pitta in the adulthood, and the Kapha in the childhood. And these three dosas, they are completely inverted in the Siddha system. That is the main difference in the Ayurveda and the Siddha system. And this pesticide concern, I think the Ayurveda has given the different formulations are there, and one formulation is there, fermented formulations. These are Arishta and Asavas are there in the Ayurveda, and these Arishta and Asava, they are mainly quench the pesticide. They can quench the pesticides and the toxins. That is the main advantages of these Ayurvedic formulations. So this pesticide concern can be, you can say, that can be limited by the formulation of the Ayurvedic formulation, these fermented formulations. And the main concern, the main challenge is the sustainable and the good quality raw material for the formulation of the herbal products.
So I think it's linked to some of the previous comments about pesticides, etc.
Yes.
No, very good. Other comments? What challenges do you see? It's also linked to what challenges are there for you? You know, you are very active researchers, young researchers in the field. So what do you want to achieve and what keeps you from achieving it? Scientifically speaking.
Sir, apart from the fact of doing the organic farming for the medicinal plants, it somehow depends upon the harvesting also. I have my personal experience about that. Some days back, we were using licorice for this cold and cough treatment back in our home. So the dried licorice roots, along with the dried licorice roots, we have some other dried other woody particles, which are not exactly licorice, some other very bitterish wood particles. So that can also happen in labs. We have two very similar plants, bakan and neem, which their leaves look nearly the same. So the harvesting practices must be like properly maintained and taken care of, so that the plants cannot get mixed up with each other and ultimately affect the activity. So that sometimes affects.
Because I certainly can see that. I think what I would say, what we are seeing here is this wider need to really get expertise in other areas, in agriculture, in processing, etc. And that's where certainly an area like ethnopharmacology is quite unique in terms of its multidisciplinary challenges. And that is a very good example. Thank you. Other comments?
I think so, because of this climatic change, most of the species, they are becoming extinct from Himalayan region. What used to be there in our grandfather's time has now become very much extinct in recent times. Secondly, because of this deforestation and more industrialization and more well-developed network of roads, it has somehow compromised. We have compromised this flora as well as the fauna. So it may be that what we are thinking today as the Ayurvedic herbs and their chemical potency would, after some time or some years or in decades, they would not be as potent as we are in a view that our Ayurvedic traditional medicines possess. So this is also a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think The sourcing of materials, access to them it's actually part of what we are covering in this paper. And it's not only climate change, it really is what goes, climate change is a consequence of the way we handle the earth. So the weird thing is that even without climate change, if you lose certain vegetation zones, in a short term, before you can see difference in climate change, you have problems with access to, for example, specific resources. There's something very interesting which also comes in, which I mentioned in one of the earlier ones, is obviously that we now are an urban world. That's a big challenge for me. It's into this one. We haven't really looked at pharmacology, activity. We talked about it earlier, about so-called negative versus positive results. So what challenges do you see in this area?
I have something. So why do we expect that all the rats, experimental rats, after giving them dose, they would behave in a similar way? There may be some resistant, some genetically well, who knows what their parents are. They may be resisting our doses. So I think to assume that all the rats, after giving them a dose, they will behave in a similar way, and there would be no. And our doses are only the main areas where we have to somehow consider also this. If they are human beings, then it means that if they are living beings, so they maybe have their own response.
Well, I think you raise a very big question, and that is how useful are animal experiments? And there's no straightforward answer. If you take a radical approach on the animal rights activist side, animal experiments are rubbish, full stop. I'm in no way endorsing. If you go for the other extreme, people just say, oh, it doesn't matter, we can try anything. But for me, again, it is a question, how can we use these data? Are they meaningfully contributing to something which takes us forward? In terms of a new product, in terms of safety assessment, in terms of whatever. So I think what we are doing this afternoon in terms of thinking about best practice is actually crucial here. I see no point in animal experiment. Somebody mentioned Tridosha, so let's just take Tridosha as an example. And say we looked at a Tridosha preparation and wanted to find something out. And the two elements which are very often missing is a clear characterization of this preparation. We have no idea what it actually specifically contains. Because Tridosha is not chemically homogeneous. And secondly, is it really an innovation? Is it novel? I think for me this is one of the big challenges that we very often lack in understanding how novel is this research project we are doing and starting. And it brings me back to what we said about scientific writing, and will come up again this afternoon. The simple fact of a robust literature review is so crucial. And I don't know whether I said that when we talked about it, but a few years ago I was at a conference, and also I've actually done it at several conferences, including some in India. The number of postgraduate MSc and undergraduate BSc students who reported data without proper scrutiny of the existing evidence was quite shocking. And that's something you need to bring back to your supervisors. And the other thing is Google Scholar is not a search engine. It's not a search engine which provides you with reliable information. If you go into Google Scholar, it's a useful first hint, perfectly fine, but a proper search in Medline, Web of Knowledge, Tox abstracts and whatever have you, is not replaced by just running a funny little Google search. So I think that adds to to what you said. Okay, what else? Is network pharmacology a great challenge and opportunity?
I don't want to discuss it.
Okay, why not? Okay, that's fine. What else?
If anyone wants it, then I am going to.
Well, we can challenge you. We'll think about them. What other big challenges do you see? Yeah?
Population explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Population day by day get increases, so require lot of wild area. Just like earlier.
Yeah.
So it's a big challenge nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So need to conserve more area and work on this.
How can I, as an ethopharmacologist, contribute to solving this problem? What is needed? So I think that's a very valid and important point. But what it really needs are changes to policies. And everything we are doing in the end requires some modification of policy. Whether it's the sustainable sourcing, the use of insecticides, and it requires some sort of a national and international strategy about how to change things. And we have made, I think, be fair, the population increase globally is going down. There are several countries where this is not happening, interestingly enough, including India. But in other, Europe is going down anyway. In terms of total population, North America is going down. The big increase today is in some regions, while in other regions it has leveled off quite dramatically. So I think it really tells us a lot how much we need to think about translating policy into a better life. Thank you. Other comments?
Sir, adulteration of herbal formulations, crude herbal formulation, powders, occasion also happens and it has been reported in local newspapers. It's an issue in Tamil Nadu.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that it's not only in Tamil Nadu. Adulteration is an issue globally, and it's an issue which is very serious. Now, the pharmaceutical profession has a very big push, which is called Fight the Fakes. This comes from mainstream pharmaceuticals. Artemisinin tablets, which don't contain artemisinin in Africa. Painkillers, which are painkiller-free. Morphine preparations, which contain hardly any morphine. And then, obviously, adulterated products. The interesting thing is, we have not really picked this up, nor have these initiatives. They are very powerful, this group of pharmaceutical scientists fighting the fakes. We need to highlight that this is equally a challenge for anyone in the field of herbal medicine. And I think adulteration is a fake. Yeah? Good quality is a fake. The difference is that we have all these environmental factors we have to deal with, while if you make artemisinin semi-synthetically or synthetically, you don't need to worry about it because it's not coming from the plant.
I think there is a conflict between the Ayurveda principles and the modern science.
Mm-hmm.
Ayurveda is based on certain principles, that certain medicine to be taken before food, after food, morning, along with the ghee, along with the honey, something like that. There are certain rules and to take the medicines. But modern science don't believe this, or means there is little studied about that. So sometimes there is a conflict between the modern science and the Ayurveda, while we're scientifically validating the Ayurvedic claims. What do you say about that?
I'll say something this afternoon about it, Monish.
Sure.
But I'll start now. I think it's a very difficult area to address.
Yes.
In the sense that many of the traditional claims may simply not not be testable scientifically.
Yes.
And we have to acknowledge this. In many parts of Spanish-speaking America, there's a very famous disease called susto, which is a sudden fright. Basically, you walk at night on a path, and in front of you, at the flashlight, you see a snake. You're frightened. From the local concept, this implies you lose your soul. The soul is somewhere else. So the traditional healer tries to bring back the soul. Now, I will not be able to design any essay to return souls to a body. I have to accept this. But I need to think about reasonable ways to understand what this could be. And again, I'm coming back to something we've done far too often in this series of seminars. It's a big challenge in China, and they are pushing right now for essays to balance yin and yang.
Yes.
Now, I have no clue how you can ever develop an essay for reducing key deficiency of balancing yin and yang. So I think we have to be very, very careful here. Where do we stop trying to be explaining something in biomedical terms? And there's a certain point where we just have to say, okay, that's a practice important and useful, but we need to step back from any assessment of the claims. What we still need to do is we need to make sure that the product is of adequate quality. That brings the safety issue right back in. And going back to the last letter of Ayush, what we said earlier about homeopathy and it not being a tradition of India but a relatively recent introduction. Now, it is established within the systems of traditional medicine in India, which I think is great and fine. In Britain, they hate homeopathy in the medical sector. It's more or less banned. Now, when I have an argument, I said, look, it's not for us, healthcare professionals, to decide whether you should take a certain preparation. But there's one thing I want to make sure. If you take a homeopathic preparation containing mercury, I want this thing to be a homeopathic preparation which is diluted to such a degree that it doesn't harm you, so that it is of adequate quality. So I think that's where there comes a point when everything about assessing herbal medicines in this context is simply not meaningful. But it doesn't take away the responsibility of healthcare professionals to say we must make sure that patients get safe medicines. Whether they're effective or not needs to be experience-based. And if highly diluted mercury works for whatever, or let them use it. But let's make sure that it's below the Avogadro number. That's the one thing I really want there. Yeah. And if this mercury magically does something to the solution, I don't understand any of these things in scientific terms, but at least we can support patients who need it.
Sir, concerned with metal uses in Siddha and Ayurveda Bhasmas, Siddha recommends some metals which are, as you said, mercury. Mercury, tin, and to some extent gold particles are also mentioned in Siddha. And also they use molluscus shell, conch. In terms of European standard, you accept those preparations?
Which of these is a herbal preparation? Plant-based?
It is a mixture of animal and plant.
So by definition, they cannot be accepted because they're not plant-based. Leaving aside how safe they are, propolis is a big issue in Europe. It cannot become a medicine because it's an animal-based product with a traditional claim. So, leave aside, I would have no problem with conch shell preparations. I'm not sure what they do. In Chinese, I've seen a large. In China, I've seen a large factory, basically frying tortoise shells. I found the whole thing rather unpleasant in a personal way. I see absolutely no sense in roasting tortoise shells and then make a medicine out of it. I just, equally to homeopathy, I don't understand it. Whether it's good quality or not, whether it's a meaningful use of resources, is a very different discussion. But again, I would not be too worried to give up some of these preparations if today we feel they're not right. Jumping back to Europe, where if you look at the old herbals, they had about 400, 500 botanical drugs in them. Today, the European Pharmacopoeia, if you leave aside the introduction from China, we have about 140. Meaning that we have lost about 300 which are no longer used. I know quite a few of these which are no longer used. Supply problems, Drosera being a good example. It's just not possible to produce Drosera sustainably. Safety, the common rue, garden rue. Muta species at risk of interactions and risk of abortion. So they have gone out. Aristolochia, we talked about it. So, what harm has been done in losing these preparations? In my view, nothing. So, I think the fight gets wrong if you're trying to defend each and every constituent. The fight needs to be, this is a healthcare practice as a whole, and you're trying to improve this healthcare practice and make sure that it's of equal standard and equal acceptance. The same is true for biomedical practice. The number of products which are no longer acceptable on the international markets is huge. And I have no problem with it. I think many of these, Lipobi being an example, where it's very controversial whether it actually is true or not in the end, but these are major medicines which are no longer acceptable, again, mostly for safety reasons. So, I would have no problem if you have to say, okay, Ciderhead medicine no longer uses mercury. Why not? It won't change anything to the basic practice. But I know that's not something Cedar practitioners would really like. But the same is true for European herbalists. And we have a discussion right now about some preparations where lots of us, including myself, I wouldn't endorse it because of a lack of evidence for efficacy and concerns about safety. So, and that's obviously, for me, the argument. If there's good clinical evidence for effectiveness, and there's a toxicological risk, it goes in favor. If there's no evidence for clinical effectiveness and there are concerns, it goes against it. And this balance, finding this balance, is, I think, a core scientific task. And that has to be done on the basis of individual preparations.
Because why I asked this, the conch shell, now I got remembered that a few years ago, Government of India implemented a tiger conservation project because hijacking tigers, there is a myth that tiger bone can cure some diseases like that. This in turn affects the sustainability of ecosystem and balance in forest ecosystem.
So, but for me, sustainability.
Can we save this question for afternoon session?
Yes.
That would be nice.
But we can pick it up, but in a nutshell, I think in a nutshell, sustainability for me needs to be a key criterion for the supply of medicines. Yeah, rhino horn is completely unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. Destroying all the Taxus forests in California, for Sursing Taxol would have been unacceptable for the simple reason that it would have only lasted for about 2 years until you have destroyed the whole forest, and then you had no more supply. So the straightforward answer here is, if a product is at risk of disappearing simply because we are not doing it unsustainably, we cannot work with this product. And tiger, rhino, some plants are prime examples of it. Over to you, Monish.
That's all for now. I will have an announcement and then we will discuss. Thank you very much for your presentation and your patience also. And in the afternoon, we have a special lecture on the best practices. That will cover various aspects in the labs and publications and ethical requirements and all. So 2:30 we will join. And tomorrow's program we will have a morning lecture. Then a small evaluation from evaluation will be given on the whole what we have learned in the last 5 days. And afternoon session we will have in the validity function. In that function the certificates will be distributed. So that's all the tomorrow's program will be. So please join on that 2:30 sharp. Okay? So.